Alright, welcome back to my boss build series, and I am on Arc Titan today, trying to revive successfully the old Heart of the Most Light meta in a way that's a little bit different than how it used to be, with Touch of Thunder storm grenades and double the duration of empowered abilities and ability regen. You know, Heart of the Most Light got a heavy nerf, storm grenades got a heavy nerf. However, the damage from Heart of the Most Light was not changed, I don't believe. You just have, there's more of a skill gap now to using Heart of the Most Light. You have to use your abilities spaced out properly and generally in the same order, generally in a proper order, to actually be able to get empowered ×2 abilities, you know, ideally on your grenade, right? Because your grenade is your big damage dealer next to your thunderclap. So you want to be trying as often as possible to have empowered ×2 uptime. And it used to be a 10-second window where you had empowered abilities, which was enough time to basically just shut your brain off. Don't even bother putting together a build with combat mods or anything, or even using weapons. Just throw on a Heart of the Most Light on any subclass and use your abilities, and oh, you got your ability back. That's basically how it used to be. Now you actually have to build craft into it to make it work how it used to. And it is extremely effective. It's just, as you're going to see here on these boss targets in Terminal Overload, and keep in mind, Terminal Overload on Neomuna, these targets, like orange bars, yellow bars, all the enemies, I believe, are 15 power levels above you, like the legendary campaign. So they're not exactly trash, you know, trash enemies. These are healthy, chunky targets, and like, if you want to farm this effectively, I would consider this end game content. You know, similar to like Master Nightfalls and GMs, and especially if you're not, you know, 6 people all together working as a team to complete this public activity. You might just be solo at times. You're going to need a build, or you're going to be dead all the time, and you're never going to complete any of these mini encounters in time to get like the extra chests or anything like that. So this is actually a good activity to test out builds, and personally, I'm not a huge fan of Terminal Overload compared to like Nightmare Containment when we had during the Witch Queen era from Season of the Haunted. That was my favorite public activity. However, Terminal Overload is still pretty good, and I actually like the variant that is on the Zephyr Concourse. I do not like Liming Harbor, and I don't like the other place. I can't even remember the other location, but basically there's 3 locations for Terminal Overload, and the Zephyr Concourse area of Neomuna is really the only place that I like. It's colorful, it's vibrant. Yeah, I just like the whole layout of the Zephyr Concourse, so I'm actually fairly happy to sit here and farm this. And the reason I'm farming it, before I go into the build and talking more about Heart of the Most Light, the reason I'm farming Terminal Overload, and you may want to as well, is because it is a good source for getting world drop weapons. So some of the world drop weapons this season are actually very viable, like Nox Perennial 5, which is the Strand high impact fusion rifle with Envious Assassin and Controlled Burst. So it is literally the best kinetic slot fusion rifle in the game, and it is a world drop, which means it is very hard to get. Like, I think all season I've had maybe 4 Nox Perennials drop for me. So that's part of my inspiration for going into Terminal Overload. There's also the Geodetic sword, the Void Adaptive Frame sword that rolls with destabilizing rounds and repulsor brace. Imagine that on Banner of War with woven mail and a void overshield, and maybe strongholds for restoration ×2. I guess I just kind of gave away one of my video ideas, but whatever. So you may want, there's some good things to farm. Also, there's the solar pistol, heliocentric, which is supposed to be very good, and it can roll with stuff like heal clip and incandescent and kill clip. So you may want to go for that. And all of these world drops, I believe, have the new origin trait wild cards, I think it's called. It's basically Telesto bolts. So on kills, you're going to spawn experimental munitions, which are like Telesto bolts. So I haven't played around with it too much, but it is something to consider. And I think it's part of the hype for these reasons, not just like the insane rolls that they're getting and the good frames. And personally though, I'm actually trying to farm a circular logic, because even though I've probably acquired like 200 circular logics by now since Lightfall dropped, I have still not got an Envious Assassin with target lock. And those two perks exist in different columns, and according to like GG and Dim, people do have Envious Assassin and target lock on circular logic, but I have never seen one drop. And so anytime terminal overload comes around every 3 days to the Zephyr concourse, I pretty much spend my game time that day farming terminal overload, because Zephyr concourse is actually also the only terminal overload variant that drops circular logic. The other two locations drop the SMG and the shotgun. And I've got a couple, obviously I've got a few good rolls of circular logic, but I want an Envious Assassin target lock. So let me know if any of you guys have got that to drop, because like at this point I am thinking that it's bugged and maybe it just doesn't drop. It's either that or my RNG is just really bad for circular logic. But anyways, so more on the build. Obviously I'm using Touch of Thunder pulse grenades, okay, because storm grenades got a big nerf. Touch of Thunder grenades, I think pulse grenades got a buff, but they didn't need a buff. Like even when storm grenades were meta, Touch of Thunder pulse grenades were very good. They were kind of just slept on. It's just because storm grenades were basically doing the same amount of damage, but you don't have to aim, you don't have to think, you just you can hide behind a piece of cover and throw storm grenades and they'll like get the job done for you. Pulse grenades, you actually have to land them to make them effective. But the reason that they're so effective is because it feeds you ionic traces as it does damage, which means that these types of grenades favor less ad clear, more single target damage if you're really going to capitalize on them. Because as it is doing damage to a target, it is feeding you ionic traces. So if you throw it at a pack of red bars and they die to the impact of the pulse grenade, and then your pulse grenade is just sitting there for like 5 seconds ticking, but there's no enemies for it to damage, which means you're not getting any pulse grenades, right? So using pulse grenades for pure ad clear is not utilizing the full potential of a pulse grenade on Titan. And obviously the ionic traces feed you ability energy, right? So this is what is going to allow us to use Heart of Inmost Light like it was pre-nerf. Back-to-back pulse grenades and thunderclaps and dodges. You're always going to have one. So as you can see from the gameplay, on every single boss, I was able to throw multiple pulse grenades within seconds of each other. So as far as the fragments go, Spark of Magnitude, Spark of Shock. Okay, so these two fragments are specifically tailored for my pulse grenade. right? Because I want my pulse grenade to last longer from magnitude, which is going to give me more ionic traces. It's going to do more damage. It's going to give me more grenade energy. It's going to feed into Heart of the Most Light that much more. Spark of Shock is going to add jolt to my pulse grenades, which is just kind of a no-brainer. So if I need to use it for ad clear, it'll do chain lightning and destroy lots of enemies in a wide area. And then the other two fragments that I'm using are synergistic with each other. So recharge and resistance. Okay. I believe these 4 fragments are key to making this build work the way that you see it. Spark of Recharge is going to give you grenade and melee energy when you are critical on health. And as you can see from a lot of these clips, I am critical on health a lot of the time. And I'm actually able to sustain that level of critical health without dying because of Spark of Resistance, right? So it's kind of counterintuitive to use recharge because you don't want to be critical, but you're just going to have to accept the fact that you're on arc. So your survivability, you don't really have any way to heal on demand outside of knockout and outside of like recuperation using combat mods. So you're just going to have to get used to being low on health, which means that you need to build into damage resistance, right? So that when you are critical on health, you can actually maintain that level of health without straight up dying. And the only way to do that is to use either a lot of damage resist mods on your chest piece, or you could use Spark of Resistance, which is, that fragment gives you quite a lot of resistance. I can't remember the values, but basically whenever you're surrounded, you get a lot of DR. And I know this because I was farming this with storm grenades without using resistance or recharge, like I was using Spark of Ions instead, so that I actually get some ionic traces for storm grenade kills, right? But yeah, so without using resistance, you will die way more often. So resistance and recharge are actually working together hand in hand. Resistance is allowing me to stay critical for longer, which is giving me more grenade and melee energy, which is feeding into the whole Heart of the Most Light loop. As far as the combat mods go, I'm producing as many orbs as I can for survivability and for stacking armor charge. I'm not using any like surge mods or decaying mods. Instead, I'm using a grenade kickstart, just 1 copy, so that if I do get 4 stacks of armor charge, then I get basically half my grenade energy back on throw, which is just going to help with playing into Heart of the Most Light that much more often. Harmonic Siphon for my machine gun, kinetic siphon for osteo here. Keep in mind that the weapons that I show you in the intro, that would be like a recommended weapon loadout for farming this activity with this build. Like a machine gun with demolitionist, so that you can spam grenades for ad clear and feel like you're using Heart of the Most Light, like the old Heart of the Most Light. Basically, if you use any machine gun with demolitionist, you're going to have tons of grenades no matter what. So it's not like it's making it's not like it's reviving Heart of the Most Light to use a machine gun with demolitionist, but it will proc Heart of the Most Light more often, right? It's just you don't have to use Heart of the Most Light to get a lot of grenades to do ad clear. But the demolitionist machine gun is obviously not going to help you for boss damage, right? So this is where the focus of the build is. It's basically on doing sustained boss damage with ability spam, basically. And demolitionist only works on kills, right? So when I'm ad clearing, I can make it feel like the old Heart of the Most Light by using demo. Kill stuff, get more grenades, throw more grenades, etc. But there's no way to get that old feeling of Heart of the Most Light before it got nerfed, when you're just focusing single targets, unless you build into it the way that I'm doing here with Touch of Thunder pulse grenades and even the Kickstart mod, right? So how am I getting my Kickstart uptime? Well, obviously I have orbs. I'm producing orbs from my weapons, from heavy-handed on my arms. I prefer, you could use firepower if you want. It's just I prefer using heavy-handed because I'm usually using my melee on targets that are close to me, which means that the orb is going to land close to me, right? Firepower is going to produce orbs oftentimes at longer ranges where it's not as easy for me to go and scoop up. So heavy-handed, you know, I'm using my melee basically just as much as I'm using my grenade anyway, and possibly even more so, especially for ad clear, because when you're amplified, you can just use your uncharged melee and produce orbs. So it's actually very good for that. I would say you would get more orbs from using heavy-handed as opposed to firepower in general. Charged up so that I can hold an extra stack of armor charge, so 4 stacks instead of 3, and then stacks on stacks so that whenever I do collect an orb, I will get 2 stacks right away. So if I collect 2 orbs, then I'm going to have 4 stacks automatically. And then I'm also using elemental charge so that every now and then when I get an ionic trace, I'll also get 2 stacks. So yes, stacks on stacks actually works with elemental charge. So when an ionic trace gives me armor charge, it will always give me 2. So the traces that I'm producing all the time, orbs I'm producing frequently, so, and then with powerful attraction on my class item, you know, I can get into an area where there's orbs, I can do my thruster dodge and scoop up everything nearby. I'm also using Reaper, so after every dodge, my weapon kill is going to give me an orb. And then Bomber, so when I dodge I get some grenade energy, and then when I do some grenade damage I get my dodge back. So Bolstering Detonation and Bomber, those are the only 2 combat mods that I'm using that are like directly feeding my feeding the loop. And then as far as stats go, 100 resilience, 100 discipline, tier 7 strength. If you're able to go higher with the strength, go for it. It would definitely help, but I don't think it's necessary. I think tier 7 is just fine. As you can see from all the damage that I'm doing on these bosses, I'm able to keep the uptime on my grenades and my thunderclap and my dodge like pretty much constantly. So yeah, anyways, that's pretty much it for the video. Let me know if you liked it, and yeah, a little bit of a different video, but you know, I figured I'd put it out there. Maybe it's something that you can use. I used it on War Priest and King's Fall, the same build, just ability spam with heavy. It's very effective, so give it a shot. Anyways, I will see you in the next one.